Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Maureen Smith. I'm calling from Ottawa, and I'm a patient partner. This is a very important topic to me because I was on a pediatric trial from the age of 8 to 18. Never, of course, in those days, a long time ago, I don't think there was any even consideration of showing the results at those times. So it's very important. And also with my work with Inform Rare, I co-lead the patient engagement strategy. So we have parent advisors and youth advisors and parent co-investigators who all have, varied experiences in clinical trials. So the sharing of the trial results is important. And a couple of years ago, I participated in Clinical Trials Ontario's a tool to co-design their tool for sharing trial results, but that was for adult trials. And I remember thinking a few times, there are certain things that are unique to our pediatric population. So when the opportunity to do this arose, I had my hand up, and I actually have the honor of being the one who named it Communikids. I'm never going to get over that one. Every time I see the name, I think that was my idea. So we had a whole list of names. I this is something that's very important to me, and I'm just thrilled that you've read the article and that you've joined us today, and hope that we can have a really good discussion with you about the work that we did in this area and the importance of it moving forward. That's my little additional introduction, Nancy. I just thought people might want to know that I feel very passionate about this topic.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, your passion and dedication has been totally instrumental to all aspects of this project. And I'm so glad you were able to join us today. Maureen is just coming from another 4-hour meeting, just further demonstrating her commitment to this project. So just to introduce myself again briefly, my name is Nancy Butcher, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto and in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm a pediatric clinical trialist and methodologist based at the hospital for sick children, and I'm the co-director of IMPACT, which is a national pediatric and perinatal clinical trials training platform. So this piece of work came out of an initiative that we undertook a couple of years ago at Sick Kids during the pandemic, during a maternity leave. But this was such a fantastic project that we had a lot of fun doing, despite all of the challenges that kind of came out around it as we were doing it. And this idea, or the importance of sharing trial results back with children and youth or trial participants in general really came out of something initially that happened to me a very long time ago when I was a PhD student and I was doing one of my my very first clinical trial. So we got to the end of the trial, and it took a lot of time for the participants. The families were extremely invested. It was involved an invasive procedure. So it really was a very we really did ask a lot of the participants, and it was successful. Everybody was on board. It was a rare disease trial, and we got to the end of the trial, and my supervisor came in the room one day, and she said, "Let's, I have a great idea. Let's send a thank you letter, and let's send a summary of the results to the participants." I was like, "Yeah, that is a great idea." And then this little light bulb went off in my head, like, oh, this is a regulated trial. And, everything that needs to, go in front of the participants needs to go through the REB. We're going to have to do an amendment. We're going to get, this is going to take a while to get organized. And we were both just sort of deflated in that moment. And we did overcome it. We did find a way to get the results back to the participants, but it was one of those things where you're like, this was harder than it should have been. And maybe I should have thought about this a little bit earlier in the process. So we'll skip ahead to one of the solutions that hopefully will help others avoid these types of situations moving forward and make it a bit easier and faster to help share the results of trial results with youth and children. So that was really a focus of a commentary that we wrote kind of moving from the why to the how of to actually do this in practice. You know, how do you move from that nice idea to like the realities of actually getting it done? So before we get any further, just to mention, I don't have any relevant disclosures to this presentation, and neither does Maureen. And you know, maybe a little bit preaching to the choir here, but just to touch a little bit more on the importance of communicating trial results. It's increasingly being seen as quite an essential step in kind of moving from, you know, moving from the, you know, from the bench to the bedside to actual clinical practice to, you know, putting the information in patients' hands. About making, you know, their own health decisions and making sure those are evidence-based decisions, and that's incorporating, you know, the views and the preferences of families, children, youth, clinicians, and policymakers in child health. So there's lots of different ways to communicate trial results. You know, there's infographics, there's videos. A very standard way of doing that typically at the end of a trial, of course, is through academic publications, but those are not always necessarily geared towards or accessible to the diverse range of knowledge users of clinical trial results, like youth, like parents, like clinicians, and policymakers. So increasingly, an alternative that's being put forward and implemented is plain language summaries, which is, you know, is really exactly what it says it is. It's really just a summary of the trial results as written in plain language that should be accessible to the audience that you're trying to reach.
Okay. So I think we'll start from the basic premise that participants in the public have the right to know the results of clinical trials. I don't think anyone would argue with that. When we receive the final results, makes us feel valued. It fosters trust in research and helps in making decisions about our healthcare by looking at the results. Um, Interestingly, a 2009 study, which is quite old by now, but showed that 68% of participants would not participate in future trials if not informed of trial results. That's pretty significant. And this CISRP is the Center for Information Study on Clinical Research Participation based in the United States. Actually came up with the number that 38% of parents whose child participated in a clinical research study, only 30% had actually received a summary of the trial results after participation. So that's a pretty low number too. So those some of the you know, you researchers, you guys love data. So here's some data for you to here's some data to show the relevance of communicating the trial results. Back to you, Nancy.
Yeah, so when it comes to the practice of returning results to participants and returning the results to pediatric participants, and in particular, this has been an evolving landscape. So, you know, if we kind of go all the way back to like, you know, when you know, during my PhD and even further before Maureen was in trials, like this was not standard practice. This is really something that's continued to evolve, and I think comes more to the forefront as patient-oriented research and patient partnership comes more to the forefront. We have a better understanding of its importance, and you can kind of see from this slide here that the regulations and the funders are catching up. So back in 2012, there was a really nice article, a framework that was published by the U.S. Children's Oncology Group. And these are still great recommendations to follow today. So they put forward this framework about not just the importance, but the practicalities, and really how to do it in a good way for pediatric cancer trials, of returning trial results to participants and families in a timely and accessible way. More recently, in Canada, we can see that in 2022, CIHR has made it a requirement that for if you are a PI of a CHR funded clinical trial, it is now a requirement to post your summary results within 12 months of the last patient visit to the clinical trial when you're collecting data for the primary outcome. There's that requirement to share the summary results publicly, and there's also a requirement that when you're publishing the results, that they be open access and accessible. So I'm just seeing in the chat that some people are having issues with the slides. Oh, okay, we're good. We're good. Okay. And relatedly, over in the European Union, they have clinical trials regulations that also make it a requirement to publish plain language summaries within 6 months of a clinical trial. And in 2023, the UK also moving ahead in this direction, mandating a requirement that all trialists must share findings with participants. So we're moving away from this is nice to do to this is something we actually need to do and plan for on a regular basis when we're planning our trials. Looking at this, these things are never easy. Change is never easy. There are some challenges that can be associated with sharing results back with participants. And these are a few of the things that have come up through our own work, also in the published literature around investigators' perceptions of barriers or challenges around sharing results back directly with participants. So one of them I alluded to before, so that can be navigating research ethics boards requirements. So depending on your institution and their local guidelines, they may want to see anything that goes back directly to a trial participant, something that's patient facing. So it's building that in at an early stage to your planning and letting them know about your plans to share trial results directly back with participants. So you don't, like me, get to the end of the trial and realize, like, oh, yes, I need to do an amendment now to actually make this work. Another challenge can be the length of time between the last visit and when the aggregate results are available. So when you get to the end of the trial, there's a lot of, there can be a lot of data cleanup, analysis, interpretation, synthesizing it, interpreting it. How are you going to present that data in a meaningful way? And those things can take time, especially if there's sort of competing priorities around that. So sometimes there can be a concern about, how long, what's the appropriate length of time? And you can see from the last slide that some of the funders and regulators have actually provided guidance now around that. So typically within that 6 to 12 month time frame would be considered appropriate. There can be concerns about sharing negative results, with participants and feelings of disappointment that might go along with that. Investigators have also highlighted the costs of doing this. They may need to work that into their budget if there isn't somebody on the team that's already sort of skilled and versed in plain language summaries or communicating with participants. And just that, that challenge of accurately communicating complex information, which is a really important point when it comes to clinical trials, which can be, depending on the trial design and its aims, can be quite complex. So it's like, how do you balance that? That those communications between making it meaningful and accessible, but not oversimplifying or inadvertently kind of overselling the trial results to participants. An additional barrier that was identified was just really the lack of guidance and templates around this. So it's kind of like, okay, well, we're expected to do this, but now like how and who is going to do this? Well, through our work and through our experiences, and we kind of wrote about this in the paper, is, one of the biggest things is really just is planning early, making sure that, you have the resources to support the development and dissemination of plain language summaries or other methods of delivering results back to trial participants. A very common tip and is absolutely critical in our experiences is really to work with partners or members from the community that from your trial with lived experience in that area to figure out how you're going to do this as a team and actually draft these materials together. So it can be extremely helpful to work with partners with lived experience to first develop a study results sharing plan, because some of those challenges that I mentioned, like, they are very trial specific, and this is not not one size fits all, and nor it should be. the way that you share results back from a pediatric, cancer trial may be very different than, something that was, targeting like a nutritional modification for healthy children. For example, there's different nuances, there's different considerations you need to take into account. And that's, really where working with your partners and members from your community can be really helpful to make it as accessible and meaningful as possible. Um, Another strategy that we recommend is, just to ask participants at the beginning of the study. It can be part of the informed consent form if they're interested to receive the results of the trial or not. So although the majority, based on on previous study results, tend to want to receive the results. Some people may not be interested in that, and they may also change their mind, during the course of the trial, depending on how the trial went for them, the outcome of the trial, of the intervention for their child. So it's something that can also be brought up, especially if it's a longer, period of time that it takes to run the trial, just to confirm if they still want to receive a copy of the results. So you can ask, during the informed consent process, come up with a mechanism for notification, for communications. And then if people leave the study early or other situations come up, you can touch base again at that sort of closeout, just to confirm that they still want to hear from the trial team. Because if there was a bad experience or a bad outcome for the child, during the trial, that's something to be aware of and to respect patient preferences and family preferences for receiving any further communications from the trial team.
And ta-da, Communicants was born. So, the researchers, I did some, searches then we identified that there was a lack of practical guidance and templates available for pediatric trial plain language summaries, especially those developed in collaboration with youth and families. So when Nancy first, pitched the idea, I said, oh, I've been involved with the one for Clinical Trials Ontario. So right away we contacted Don Richards, who's in charge of their patient engagement, and Susan Marlin, and said, do you guys want to join this project? Do you want to collaborate with us? Because we'd like to do a pediatric version. And, overwhelmingly said, yes, absolutely. We think that would be a great addition to be able to put that one up on our website also alongside the one for adults. I was especially really interested in hearing the perspectives of youth and families, because when I participated on the one for the adult trials, which so I did a big pediatric trial, I've also done several adult trials. One of the non-patient members, it was, multiple interest holders, just like we did on the team, said, oh, if you can't do it right away, the patients have moved on and it's too late. They've moved on. I said, you probably don't have a chronic disease. We don't really move on. We still have that condition, and we're really interested in knowing what the results are, even if it does take a little bit of time. And that research is really important to us. So I thought, wow, it's really important to get those perspectives. And won't it be interesting to see the different perspectives that the youth and the family caregivers might also have, because they've got their unique knowledge of what their needs and preferences are in receiving the trial results. So that's how the project came to be, with multiple interest holders working together to come up with something that works for everyone and works for research ethics boards too. So next slide. So it's really important to tailor it for pediatrics, and there's youth autonomy and decision making about their health is so important, and it absolutely has to be extended to the results of the trials. Just as we say youth autonomy and the consent to join a trial is there, well, it should be at the other end too. We had a lot of discussions about what age level would our tool target, and we kind of landed on, youth could read it on their own. And I think we were thinking 12 and up in youth. And because that was the age that we had in our youth who engaged with us on it. And we had 12 to 18-year-olds basically. And we thought parents would then be able to read it with their child if it was written at the level that we were targeting. So you have to pick a level. You can't you've got to kind of make a decision about that. And we were really interested in seeing the different needs that children, parents, and youth would have, and the implications of that on clinical trials and pediatric populations. So it was really important. Just a sneak peek, and I know you read the article, but there was really the youth had very specific suggestions that were kind of different from the parents. And one of them was to start with the thank you section. I don't think they get thanked enough for what they do. So that was quite interesting. They were pretty adamant that that's how it should open, that to ensure that our gratitude, our gratitude for participating in the trial is communicated as a primary message. And they absolutely wanted that executive summary at the beginning of the template. They were also pretty adamant about that. A couple of bullet points, like get it down to the key messages. And they had very robust discussions about how the risks are communicated and how they're associated with the side effects and benefits. So that when you look at the final template that we produced, and you compare it to the one that was for the adults, you'll see some of those changes in there. We call the executive summary. They liked at a glance. They thought that was a really good way, and maybe the dedicated section on side effects. They had a lot to say about that too. And they for them and for parents, how trialists can elaborate on the next steps of the trial. So future phases, if applicable, publications, how they can discuss their trial result with their family doctors or other health providers. So next steps were really important, and that's some of the things that came out of really tailoring it to pediatrics and really listening to to those perspectives. And because we did them separately in separate groups, right? Workshops for youth, workshops for parents. But I think Nancy's going to explain that a little further. But I had to give that little sneak preview, Nancy. Just had to do it. Back to you. Oh well, me. We're gonna put the poll up.
Yeah.
Okay. What percent didn't we already answer that? What percentage would like to receive? Hmm. Oh, would like to receive. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Mhm. Are the poll results coming up? I don't see them. Oh, there you
Yes.
go. There we go. Okay.
Can you see them now?
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting.
So it looks like about the majority of the group, 60%, thinks that, most trial participants, 90% would want to receive information about the trials, and 40% of the group picks 75%. And nobody thinks it's in the realm of 15 or 40%. So I will stop that there. And yes, it's about 90%. Depends on the study, but that's generally where the literature seems to land. Okay, so this is a little bit more information about the tool that Maureen mentioned, which is called Communikids. Um, so as she mentioned, we co-developed this. It's really a pediatric plain language summary toolkit because there's a template, but there's also examples. There's also instructions and tips to follow as part of that. And as she mentioned, this was created in partnership with patient partners who were on the team, so we're on the steering committee, and that were involved in all aspects of designing and running the study, running the workshops, and interpreting the feedback that we got and implementing it into the template, as well as youth and parent advisors. So there was 5 youth and 8 parents from different families from across Canada, and as I mentioned, this was sort of during the early days of the pandemic. So we very quickly pivoted to online workshops for the conduct of the study. But I think that was actually a wonderful thing because instead of, having a very small select group of people who could come to in-person activities, in downtown Toronto, for example, we were able to have a cross-country reach and kind of try to schedule it at a time that was very convenient to people. So we worked with them to figure out what was the best time. So we typically held them on Saturdays, for example, when people were more likely to make it. So I think this helped us get a better reach and a better diversity of voices involved in the development of communikids. And we did this as an iterative process. So we held 3 different virtual workshops. We held them separately between the youth and the parents, so that they could provide their input separately. And then we would kind of look at it to see where there was similarities and differences. Because at the outset of this project, we actually did not know if we needed to develop a separate tool for youth versus parents. So we said, you know what? Let them tell us what they need. And so that's what came out of the workshops. And actually, there was a lot of incredible alignment between what the youth and the parents said. So ultimately, we ended up with that single tool that ended up fitting the needs of both of the groups. And so it was an iterative process. They would give us their feedback. We would incorporate it. We show it to them again. We get their feedback, the next version, change it again, bring it back to the table until everyone was satisfied with the output. Once we had a pretty complete draft, we then did a kind of an informal survey through our networks with pediatric trialists and ethics boards members from pediatric hospitals from across the country to get their input, to take a look at it and, provide some feedback on it. And generally, it was very, very, very positive. One of the questions we asked was just like, how likely are you to use this template? And the majority were either very likely or likely to use the Communikids template. We also work with a graphic designer who is also a youth partner to draft it to make it more fun, more engaging, more colorful. You make sure that we were following accessibility guidelines. And so we kind of all had some consensus on what should go into it in terms of the content, its usability, and its accessibility. So here it is kind of hard to show it on a screen all at once, but I did want to give you a glimpse of what the Communikids template can look like in practice. So this is an actual clinical trial. This is the CHAMP trial, which is about child and adolescent migraine prevention. So on the left-hand side, you can see that like brief summary, the at a glance section. We start off with a thank you. That was very, very important. We learned from the advisors, and the feedback we received was, give the one pager for people who only want to know that level of information, or they just have a minute to look at it. But a lot of parents and youth said, well, you know what? I want the details. I want more than that. So like an infographic or a one pager just wouldn't suit their needs of the depth of information that they wanted to digest and think about and, potentially bring to their doctors theoretically, if they were a participant in a trial. So then we get into the details. There's a section that's just like all the basic trial information. This is all editable. People can just change it and modify it however they need to. And then it's just broken down into, some information about the trial. What did we do? How did we do it? What do we want to know? So it's really about what were the research questions and a simple explanation of the phase of the trial. So it's a phase 3 trial. So there's an explanation of that. And, we tried to use graphics to illustrate, the number of participants who was able to be included, as well as the different locations. This is a US trial. So there's an image of where everyone came from across the US. The results, this was honestly, this is the most challenging part to write because it takes a lot of thought. We went through a lot of revisions as a team to come up with an example of something that we thought was struck that balance between the right level of detail of the details of the trial, since that's what people were telling us they want to know, but to put it into really accurate and balanced terms. So there's a breakdown of the results. There was three different drugs, so you can see a comparison of the efficacy between the two different drugs and the placebo. And as mentioned, and unlike a standard scientific paper, they did not want to see the side effects lumped in with the efficacy results. They really strongly felt that they needed that to be separate. They wanted to be able to really easily see what the side effects were, understand how common they were, and the seriousness of those side effects, on an aggregate basis. So we adopted a framework that's was developed by sick kids to report back on frequency, severity, and any potential long-term impact of side effects for communicating about those in the trial. And here on the right-hand side, you can see, for example, the next steps. And so just depends on, that's going to depend, of course, what the trial is. And in this case, there was some guidance provided about, if you want to discuss this trial with your doctor. So it's kind of like, if you wish, you may let your child's doctor know that this trial showed no evidence of a benefit and was stopped early for this reasons, and both medications cause side effects.
Can I chime in with two points, Nancy?
Please.
So when it first came out, I'm like, what's with the periods at the end of the titles? And I was quickly taught that that's an accessibility. So if people are putting it through a reader, it'll stop at the periods. So that's why there's periods. It's not grammatically correct. The second thing I just wanted to point out was you'll see that we have the example with the migraine trial. So we had quite a few discussions about, how to get meaningful feedback, especially from our youth partners. And so we decided to go to base it on a trial and say, had you participated in this trial, what would you want to know? So we got Nancy got permission to use that trial. And so in our workshops, we were working from like concrete land, I like to call it, because we didn't think that, just speaking about any trial would be easy to actually try to imagine what you might want to know. So we still think that it absolutely, the prompts that are in the template, you could adjust it to any trial, but we did kind of work from that concrete level, and that seemed to work well. And we chose migraines because we thought, well, that's something that most people, even if they haven't had a migraine, they've had a headache, they could identify with. And so it wasn't a specific condition that you would have to basically have a lot of lived experience to understand. So just wanted to add that there, Nancy.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, so the Communicate template is freely available to use. It's available in both English and French. You can customize it in Word, you can change it in Canva. That was another piece of feedback from the youth. Like, the days of PowerPoint are over, people. Move on to Canva. So we made sure that there was a Canva templates also accessible for people to use. You can go online. I can throw the link in the chat later. This is hosted on the Clinical Trials Ontario website. So we put it as part of the participant experience toolkit so that, whether you're doing an adult trial or a pediatric trial, there's the relevant tools there for you in one place to use. And the tip sheet just includes things like how to use the template, design considerations, because this should be adoptable and, rebrandable. Some strategies for developing it collaboratively with youth and caregiver partners for your own trials, and some tips and practical considerations about ethics approval, opting in and opting out, and that sort of thing. So this is just to highlight the two papers that we published about this on. So the commentary in Pediatrics, and there's also an open access publication where it describes in more detail that we co-wrote with our patient partners how youth and families were integrated in the development of communicates. Over to you, Maureen.
Right. So call to action, absolutely to funders to provide funding and require return of results. So not just return of results, but return of results in a readable format. So as the European Medicines Agency has done now, requiring plain language summaries. It's really important. Institutions and research ethics boards, incentivize, monitor it, make the tool available. If you're an REB, when you're set, you're corresponding with the team, you can make sure that they have that tool, and for journals to require the inclusion of plain language summaries in their publications. So. And the last slide just speaks to, really that this novel addition is part of responsible research practice and it increased transparency. And I don't think I need to explain the importance of may improve the general public's trust in research, which is a very timely topic right now. So anything that we can do to increase that public trust in research, I think is really important. And next slide. This is our team, so who worked on developing this with our youth advisors and our parent advisors. And over to the discussion.